Doug McClure stepped onto the screen with a bright smile, a rugged charm, and the presence of a man who seemed born to ride a horse beneath the western sky. Audience.
Doug McClure had the kind of smile that made audiences believe everything would work out in the end. Whether he was riding across the open plains as the easygoing cowboy Trampas or facing prehistoric monsters in one of his adventure films, he projected confidence, warmth, and an effortless charm that seemed completely natural. To millions of television viewers during the 1960s, Doug wasn't just another actor. He became the face of an era when Western heroes represented honesty, courage, and freedom. But behind the familiar grin was a man whose real life was far more complicated than the characters he portrayed. For years, people assumed they knew Doug McClure. They saw the successful television star, the handsome leading man, and the actor who always seemed comfortable in front of the camera. What they rarely saw were the constant pressures of Hollywood, the struggle of escaping a role that became both a blessing and a burden, the heartbreak of failed marriages, and the determination it took to keep moving forward even after the spotlight began to fade. In many ways, Doug lived two lives, not because he hid a dark secret, but because the public knew only the cowboy, while the man behind the costume carried disappointments, doubts, and challenges that rarely made headlines. His story begins long before television fame. Douglas Osborne McClure was born on May 11, 1935, in Glendale, California. Unlike many future Hollywood stars who dreamed of acting from childhood, Doug's early years revolved around a much simpler world. Raised in Southern California, he enjoyed an active outdoor lifestyle filled with sports, horseback riding, and adventures under the warm California sun. His father worked as an accountant, while his mother was a newspaper columnist, giving him a stable upbringing that encouraged both discipline and curiosity. From an early age, horses became one of the greatest passions of his life. While many children admired cowboys through comic books and movies, Doug actually learned how to ride. That experience would later become one of the greatest advantages of his acting career. Directors quickly realized they didn't have to teach him how to handle a horse or move naturally in the saddle. He already possessed those skills long before Hollywood came calling. Doug also excelled in athletics. During high school, he played football, basketball, and spent countless hours surfing along the California coast. Friends remembered him as energetic, approachable, and always ready for an outdoor adventure. Few could have guessed that this athletic young man would eventually become one of television's most recognizable Western stars. After graduating from high school, Doug attended Santa Monica City College before continuing his education at UCLA. Interestingly, acting wasn't initially his only career plan. He studied physical education as a practical alternative, understanding that success in Hollywood was never guaranteed. That cautious mindset reflected his personality. Rather than chasing fame at any cost, he preferred keeping realistic options available. His appearance soon opened unexpected doors. Tall, athletic, and photogenic, Doug found work as a model, appearing in advertisements that gradually introduced him to the entertainment industry. Commercial work led to auditions, and auditions eventually led to small television roles. Like countless young actors during the 1950s, he accepted whatever opportunities came his way, understanding that experience mattered more than instant recognition. The road wasn't glamorous. He appeared briefly in numerous television programs, often playing characters audiences quickly forgot once the credits rolled. Yet casting directors noticed something unusual. Doug wasn't flashy or theatrical. Instead, he possessed an authentic screen presence that made even small performances believable. He looked comfortable on camera, never appearing as though he was trying too hard. Throughout the late 1950s, he steadily built his resume with appearances in popular television series and supporting roles in films. One important early project came with the World War II film The Enemy Below in 1957, starring Robert Mitchum and Kurt Jurgens. Although Doug's role was relatively small, the production gave him valuable experience working alongside established Hollywood veterans. Watching accomplished actors perform every day became an education that no acting class could fully provide. The film also unexpectedly changed his personal life. During production, Doug met opera singer Faye Brash. Their relationship developed quickly, and before long they married. Like many young couples, they entered marriage full of optimism, believing the future would unfold exactly as planned. At that point, Doug was still an actor searching for his breakthrough, unaware that his biggest opportunity was only a few years away. As the 1950s turned into the 1960s, Doug continued appearing in increasingly significant productions. He worked with respected directors and shared the screen with some of Hollywood's biggest stars. One particularly important project was The Unforgiven in 1960, directed by the legendary John Huston and starring Burt Lancaster and Audrey Hepburn. Although Doug remained part of the supporting cast, every production expanded his experience and strengthened his reputation inside Universal Studios. Television, however, would ultimately become the place where his career truly began to accelerate. He landed regular roles in series such as Overland Trail and later Checkmate. Neither became a lasting cultural phenomenon, but both demonstrated that Doug could carry recurring television roles with confidence. Producers appreciated his professionalism, reliability, and easygoing personality. He arrived prepared, worked hard, and rarely created problems on set, qualities that made him someone studios enjoyed hiring again and again. Still, despite years of steady work, he had not yet found the role that audiences would forever associate with his name. That opportunity arrived in 1962. NBC was developing an ambitious new Western series based on Owen Wister's famous novel The Virginian. Unlike most television Westerns of the era, this production would feature 90-minute episodes, cinematic storytelling, and a large ensemble cast. Universal wanted actors who could bring authenticity to frontier life rather than simply wear cowboy costumes. Doug auditioned for the role of Trampas. At first glance, Trampas wasn't intended to become the show's defining personality. In Wister's original novel, the character was far less sympathetic than the version television audiences would eventually embrace. But something happened once Doug stepped into the role. His natural humor, genuine love of horses, and relaxed confidence transformed Trampas into someone viewers couldn't help but enjoy watching. Without realizing it, Doug McClure had just accepted the role that would make him famous, and shape both the greatest triumph and the greatest challenge of his entire career. The premiere of The Virginian marked the beginning of a remarkable chapter in Doug McClure's life. At first, the series revolved around the quiet, honorable ranch foreman known simply as the Virginian, played by James Drury. Trampas was introduced as a colorful supporting character, a carefree cowboy with a mischievous streak who often found himself in trouble. No one expected him to become one of the show's biggest attractions. But audiences had other ideas. Week after week, viewers responded to Doug's natural charisma. Unlike the flawless heroes often seen in Westerns, Trampas felt human. He made mistakes, cracked jokes, flirted, got himself into impossible situations, and somehow always found a way back. His charm wasn't forced. It came across as genuine, and fans quickly embraced him as someone they would enjoy knowing in real life. Writers noticed the growing popularity almost immediately. As the seasons progressed, Trampas received more screen time, richer storylines, and greater emotional depth. Before long, Doug McClure had become one of the central faces of The Virginian. Although James Drury remained the title star, Trampas evolved into the character many viewers looked forward to seeing every week. The chemistry between the cast also helped elevate the series. Off-screen, Doug developed a lasting friendship with James Drury. Unlike many television partnerships that ended when production stopped, their friendship endured for decades. They frequently stayed in touch, shared stories about their careers, and supported one another long after the cameras stopped rolling. Friends often remarked that Doug's cheerful personality was remarkably similar to Trampas. He enjoyed making people laugh, rarely held grudges, and preferred optimism over negativity. Yet while millions of viewers saw effortless entertainment, the production demanded an exhausting schedule. The Virginian was one of the most ambitious television series of its time. Each 90-minute episode required extensive location shooting, complicated action scenes, and long days under demanding conditions. The cast often spent countless hours filming outdoors in heat, dust, and unpredictable weather. Doug performed many of his own horseback scenes thanks to his writing experience, adding authenticity that audiences appreciated without always realizing why it looked so convincing. The success of the series also brought financial stability and nationwide recognition. Magazine interviews, fan mail, public appearances, and growing popularity transformed Doug into one of television's most familiar faces. For an actor who had spent years accepting small roles, it seemed as though every dream had finally come true. But success in Hollywood often carries an invisible price. As The Virginian grew more popular, Doug gradually became inseparable from Trampas in the minds of television audiences. Producers began seeing him primarily as the cowboy rather than as a versatile actor capable of playing many different characters. It wasn't a problem while the show remained successful. In fact, it was one of television's biggest advantages. However, the longer the series continued, the more difficult it became to imagine Doug in any other role. For nearly 9 seasons, he lived inside the world of Shiloh Ranch. During that time, many cast members came and went. Characters were introduced, written out, or replaced as the series evolved. Through all those changes, Doug remained one of the constants. Alongside James Drury, he became one of the few actors who stayed with the production from beginning to end. By the time the final episodes aired in 1971, The Virginian had produced an extraordinary 249 episodes, making it one of the longest-running Western dramas in television history. Professionally, it was an incredible achievement. Personally, however, life away from the cameras wasn't nearly as steady. Doug's first marriage had already ended before his rise to television stardom. His second marriage, to actress Barbara Luna, also proved short-lived. Both entered the relationship with genuine affection, but Hollywood careers often placed enormous pressure on personal lives. Long filming schedules, constant travel, public attention, and demanding work made maintaining a marriage increasingly difficult. Barbara Luna later spoke respectfully about Doug despite their divorce, describing him as warm, funny, and likable. Their relationship simply couldn't survive the realities that accompanied sudden fame. Doug would eventually marry again, hoping each new chapter would bring greater stability. Friends never described him as cynical about love. Quite the opposite. He remained hopeful, believing each relationship deserved a fresh start. That optimism became one of his defining characteristics, even when life repeatedly tested it. As the late 1960s approached, television itself was changing. For years, Westerns had dominated American entertainment. Series featuring cowboys, ranches, sheriffs, and frontier towns attracted millions of viewers every week. But cultural tastes gradually shifted. Younger audiences wanted different stories. Detective dramas, police shows, science fiction, and modern action series began replacing the traditional Western. Even a successful program like The Virginian couldn't avoid those changing trends. The producers attempted several adjustments to keep the series fresh, including cast changes and even renaming the final season The Men from Shiloh. Despite those efforts, ratings slowly declined. After nearly a decade on television, NBC finally brought the series to an end. For Doug McClure, the cancellation represented more than the loss of a job. He was only 36 years old, an age when many actors are just reaching their prime. Yet he suddenly faced one of the most difficult questions any successful television star can encounter. What happens after the role that defines your career? Hollywood welcomed him warmly, but almost every opportunity came with comparisons to Trampus. Casting directors admired his work, yet audiences still expected to see the cowboy they had loved for 9 years. Escaping that image proved far harder than earning it in the first place. Doug refused to give up. Instead of waiting for another Western series, he actively searched for different kinds of projects. He appeared in television pilots, detective dramas, and adventure stories, determined to show that he could do more than ride horses across dusty landscapes. One of those opportunities arrived with Search, an innovative science fiction television series. The program featured futuristic technology and investigative missions, a dramatic departure from frontier life. Doug embraced the challenge enthusiastically. Although the show attracted a loyal following, it lasted only 2 seasons. It became clear that finding another career-defining role would not be easy. Rather than allowing disappointment to consume him, Doug adapted. Throughout the mid-1970s, he reinvented himself in an unexpected way. He became the leading man in a series of fantasy adventure films inspired by the novels of Edgar Rice Burroughs. Movies like The Land That Time Forgot, At the Earth's Core, The People That Time Forgot, and Warlords of Atlantis introduced him to an entirely different audience. These productions combined lost civilizations, prehistoric creatures, mysterious islands, and imaginative storytelling. They weren't major Hollywood blockbusters, but they developed devoted fan followings around the world. Doug approached these roles with the same professionalism he had always shown, never treating them as lesser works simply because they belonged to a different genre. Ironically, years later, these films would become cult classics, appreciated by science fiction and adventure fans who discovered them through television broadcasts and home video. Although he never again experienced the overwhelming popularity of The Virginian, Doug accomplished something many actors never achieve. He kept working. Decade after decade, new directors continued hiring him because they trusted his talent, his work ethic, and his reputation as someone who made every production stronger. Fame may have changed, but respect within the industry remained. Still, behind the steady career and familiar smile, another battle was quietly unfolding, one that had nothing to do with ratings, Hollywood expectations, or typecasting. It was a challenge that would ultimately test Doug McClure more than any role he had ever played. By the 1980s, Hollywood looked very different from the industry Doug McClure had entered 3 decades earlier. The era of classic television westerns had largely faded, replaced by crime dramas, sitcoms, action series, and blockbuster films. Many actors who had once been household names struggled to find work, but Doug refused to disappear. Instead of chasing the spotlight, he focused on what had always mattered most to him, continuing to act. He became a familiar guest star on numerous television shows, appearing in productions such as Fantasy Island, The Fall Guy, Murder, She Wrote, Airwolf, and several other popular series. While these appearances rarely made front-page entertainment news, they demonstrated something important about Doug's career. Directors and producers continued to trust him. He arrived prepared, treated cast and crew with respect, and brought the same professionalism to a single guest appearance that he had once given to 9 seasons of The Virginian. He also found success with a younger generation through the fantasy sitcom Out of This World, where he portrayed Mayor Kyle Applegate and later Sheriff Kyle Applegate. Many younger viewers came to know Doug from this light-hearted series without realizing that he had once been one of television's biggest Western stars. It was a reminder that every generation discovers actors in its own way. Despite remaining active, Doug understood that public perception had changed. During one interview, he joked that people sometimes acted as though he had disappeared completely. His humor reflected a deeper truth. He had never stopped working. The difference was that audiences often remembered him so strongly as Trampus that everything else he accomplished seemed to exist in that character's shadow. Yet Doug rarely expressed bitterness. Friends consistently described him as someone who appreciated the career he had been given. He understood that millions of actors never receive a role as memorable as Trampus. Rather than resent the character that made him famous, he embraced it. At fan conventions and public appearances, he happily spoke with viewers who had grown up watching The Virginian. He recognized that those memories meant just as much to the audience as they did to him. Away from the cameras, however, his personal life continued to experience change. Over the years, Doug married 5 times. Each relationship reflected a different chapter of his life, from the uncertainty of his early acting years to the pressures of television fame and the quieter period that followed. While several marriages ended in divorce, people who knew Doug often emphasized that he never became cynical about love. He believed in starting over, even after disappointment. His longest and final marriage was to Diane Funberg, whom he married in 1979. Unlike earlier relationships that unfolded during the height of his fame, this marriage developed during a more settled period of his life. Diane remained beside him through the later stages of his career, offering stability as Hollywood changed around him. Their marriage lasted until his death and became the strongest partnership of his adult life. Doug was also a devoted father. His daughter, Tane McClure, followed a creative path in entertainment as an actress, singer, and filmmaker, while his younger daughter, Valerie, chose a more private life. Although his work frequently required travel and long hours, those close to the family said he genuinely tried to remain involved in his daughters' lives. He understood that success on screen meant little if it came at the complete expense of family. One of the reasons colleagues remembered Doug so fondly was his attitude. Hollywood has long been known for oversized egos and fierce competition, but Doug earned a different reputation. Crew members often described him as approachable, generous with newcomers, and quick to lighten the mood during long filming days. He wasn't known for creating conflict or demanding special treatment. Instead, he treated acting as a profession rather than a platform for celebrity. As the early 1990s arrived, Doug was still accepting new projects. He reunited with James Drury in The Gambler Returns, The Luck of the Draw, delighting longtime Western fans who enjoyed seeing the 2 old friends together again. He also appeared briefly in the 1994 film Maverick, a playful reminder of the Western genre that had shaped so much of his career. Then life took an unexpected turn. In 1994, Doug was diagnosed with lung cancer. The diagnosis came as a devastating blow, but those around him noticed something remarkable. He did not allow the illness to define him. Instead of withdrawing completely from public life, he continued working whenever possible. Acting had been part of his identity for nearly 40 years, and he wasn't ready to walk away simply because life had become more difficult. That same year brought one of the greatest honors of his career. On November 16, 1994, Doug McClure received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. For an actor who had dedicated decades to television and film, it represented official recognition of his contribution to the entertainment industry. Friends recalled how meaningful the ceremony was, especially given the health challenges he was quietly facing. It wasn't simply another award. It was acknowledgement that his work had become part of Hollywood history. Even while undergoing treatment, Doug continued accepting acting roles. He believed that staying active gave him purpose. Those who worked with him during this period admired his determination and positive attitude. Rather than asking for sympathy, he focused on doing the work he loved. Unfortunately, the disease progressed rapidly. While filming in Hawaii during the final months of his life, Doug suffered a serious medical emergency. Further examinations revealed that the cancer had spread beyond his lungs. Despite the efforts of his doctors and the support of his family and friends, his condition continued to worsen.